If you spend enough time in a Dwarf Fortress world, you are bound to come across people you recognize from time to time. Such was the case a couple weeks ago, when I was working on my Fortress of Mandatory Happiness and I happened upon Stozu Rushed Hates, aka the subject of the first video I ever made. In real life it had been about 3 months since I last saw her, but in the game it had been 22 years. If you watched my first video on Stozu, then you know the story, but to quickly recap, I found her in the basement of my fortress acting suspicious, looked in her inventory to see if I could find any stolen items, and instead only found tears and a book called Give Me the Goblin. It turned out that Give Me the Goblin was a cruel book written by her that was all about her joining her own performance troupe. Hence the title, How Does a Goblin Dancer React to a Bad Review? Soon after I discovered her, she left my fortress with the rest of her troupe, and I thought that was it. Then, 3 months/22 years later, a troupe of goblin performers set up shop in my newest fort's tavern. I'll be honest and say that when I saw a troupe of goblins come in, I figured there was a decent chance that Stozu would be among them. After all, how many goblin performance troupes could one world support? Even still, I was happy to see her and catch up a little. She hadn't managed to scrounge up any clothes in her 22 years about, which I double-checked and confirmed wasn't just a normal visitor thing. In all my other forts they managed to keep their clothes on, but Stozu always marched to the beat of her own drum. Her book was still weirdly cold and cruel, but it seemed like things were looking up for her, because she no longer had tears in her eyes. Just frozen goblin blood on her feet. It was presumably because she had been walking around the world for the past 22 years, living the rough and wild life of a traveling dancer. That sounded like an exciting time to me, but I couldn't ask her any questions about it or get her to tell me any stories about her travels. In Fortress mode, all I had the power to do was observe. So I switched over to Legends mode, or rather, Legends mode filtered through Legends Viewer to make it readable. I learned that Stozu had once had a family, but all but her grandfather on her dad's side were dead. I learned that at 12 years old she took up a job as a spinner in the dark pits of Cruelshut, but just 7 years later gave it up to follow her dreams and become a dancer. I even learned that she managed to survive attacks by 2 different lumbering monsters. She invented dances and wrote a book so mean it made her cry, and then in early 205, she visited my fortress of Mountain House. This wasn't when I first noticed her, that would be in 207, but this was the start of a pattern for her, because between 205 and 216, she came back to Mountain House repeatedly. I didn't leave Mountain House until around 216 myself, so if I'd been a little bit more observant, I could have caught up with her a lot earlier. Too busy redecorating, I guess. It wasn't until 229, when she visited me in my fortress of Orb Ices, that she broke her pattern of trekking over the mountains every couple of years to go from Finder Closes to Mountain House, or back again. I don't think she enjoyed her time in Orb Ices very much though. After I melted all the unhappy dwarves, she was nowhere to be found. She was safe though, and back on the road again. With only a couple of weeks until the Steam release, and just a project or 2 left to do before I retire the world, I have to imagine this may very well be the last time I see Stozu. I'm glad it could come full circle before the end. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all 1,089 of you who subscribed between my last video on Stozu and this follow-up.